the first state visit of King Charles III's reign and the first state visit to be held in the UK since Donald Trump rolled into town in 2019. And I think it's safe to say that the palace pulled out all the stops to provide a royal welcome this week. Here we have the horses being prepared for the official state coach for the carriage procession. This is the national flower of South Africa, the protea.
Incredible.
Yeah, and it's being replicated out of sugar and carefully hand-painted, ready for the president to dine with the king and Queen consort. Wesley, how will the history books remember this one?
All the king's horses and all the king's men, and what I thought standing on the mall that day was there was no diminution of ceremony. People that said, oh, it'll be slimmed down. The grand bits of the monarchy, I think, are still in place. Quite decent crowds on the mall and a very, very happy feeling. So there was a day of ceremonial at the palace at the Westminster Abbey and then a visit to Kew the next day and the City of London.
Yeah.
But it was a scale done in that sense.
But I also noticed at the banquet that it was much less flamboyant than when the Queen gave state banquets. There were less flowers, no huge bowls of fruit, because this is very Charles. Let's be green. Let's get all the flowers from the hothouses at Windsor and Sandringham, and let's just use what we've got. So I noticed that particularly. I think it looked quite different.
As much as this is him and the Queen consort setting out their stall, there's a genuine reason for these state visits. They are encouraged by the government to hold them, and this is where we start to see them exerting their soft power. So our relationship with South Africa is long, as the Queen had an extraordinary tie with the country and one of its most memorable leaders.
As does the King.
As does the King,
I mean,
yeah.
and he said in both of his speech, he kicked it off by commenting, of course, about the Queen and Nelson Mandela's famous relationship, referring to each other on first-name terms, something that's sort of transcended the ages. And indeed, Charles has been to South Africa many times and met Mandela and was able to draw on those anecdotes.
Let's look at how he opened the speech.
President Ramaphosa, welcome. Evsheni, Dumela, Suabona, Molo, Molweni, Nda.
Wow.
This is almost Prince of Wales behaviour as opposed to King Charles behaviour, would you say?
Charles has this wonderful delivery. I mean, I always think he's like a sort of Shakespearean actor. He really knows how to give a speech. And I think that he always speaks with huge affection, A, about his wife, my darling wife, and B, about his late mother. He makes it
He's a great orator.
He makes it sing. He really does. And I think that was a wonderful delivery and a wonderful speech.
Is this the kind of reception that they would expect when they're carrying out a state visit, Matt?
It really it had a bit of glamour, a bit of glitter, a bit of excitement. You had the macrons, you had red carpets, you had Arc de Triomphe, you had everything that a state visit should be. Visually, it was fantastic. The speeches
Kind of won the room. Well, there were some great moments. Let's take a look through some of his finest, shall we?
Monsieur le Président, dans tout cela, nous pouvons compter sur notre solide amitié, qui se renouvelle et se redynamise à chaque nouvelle génération.
Very well done. I mean, he spoke as well extensively about the relationship between France and the UK, saying that the connections between our people are myriad and represent the lifeblood of our history, which was inspired by my great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII. So he really was reaching back across the history books, but also managed to bring a few laughs to the occasion. Spoke about the fact that his mother, Dickie, had graced the dance floors there, carrying him as a young child, with her and Philip dancing to Edith Piaf.
He was conjuring up pictures, and he was reflecting on his mother's previous visits, and looking down on him, she would have been very proud of him.
Yes. Well, it was a lovely anecdote. We've seen him now in the first year of his reign undertake two really important state visits to Germany and now to Paris, both of which have been incredibly successful.
On this tour, or state occasion, the royal couple took an average of 5 to 7 engagements a day. Is this more than ever before?
It is a lot more than the late Queen would have done.
Really?
It is, yes. The late Queen would have done a lot of set pieces. We've got to remember that this man that we call King Charles III, he was brought up on engagements. He was brought up on duty and doing so many things a day. Queen Camilla wasn't. So she's getting used to the idea, and she did incredibly well to actually face not just Mrs. Macron, but French champion at table tennis. It's quite something.
Welcome back to the Royal Beat. Well, it's been a milestone week for the King and Queen as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary while in Italy for a state visit. It was such a relief, Elsa, and truly joyful to see the King looking so well, because of course I think we were all a little bit worried when he went into hospital, albeit briefly.
He did look happy and joyous and well, and the sun came out for them and the crowds were there, and I thought, what a great start to a state visit.
There were some tweaks to the schedule, not because of the King's cancer treatment, but because the Pope was unwell. But a meeting did happen at the Vatican. How important do you think it would have been for the King for this meeting to have gone ahead?
Oh, really important. I mean, it was a private meeting. We weren't expecting it. We also only got this photo the day after because initially, you know, the media were not actually properly invited in. But it's really important for Charles.
And of course, it happened on a very special day, on the day of their wedding anniversary.
Their 20th wedding anniversary.
Afia,
yeah.
how did they celebrate it?
I mean, a state banquet for a couple of hundred,
yes.
right? And why not celebrate in absolute style at this state banquet, you know, in Italy?
How did he get away with the state dinner rather than a romantic candlelit dinner for two, Elsa?
I think it's rather cheapskate of him, isn't it? You know, not taking his beautiful wife out after 20 years and just gate crashes a state banquet for all these other people. So actually good on him for saving a few pennies.
Let's turn our attention to the King and Queen's recent visit to Canada for the state opening of Parliament and Charles's first as sovereign. Now, Chris, you were there every step of the way. How was it? And an important trip, right?
Really, really important, actually. And I thought it was really quite something for the Canadians to have their king there. What I got from being in Canada was the way in which they feel much more fearful of Donald Trump. We might look over the other side of the Atlantic and go, ha, he wants to make them the 51st state. But you really feel that when you're in Canada. And a lot of people say we've been united through fear. And that was what I took away from it. And the King coming to visit them and to make this speech, they saw that was him giving his support to Canadians at what is a very uncertain time.
It wasn't a speech that he wrote, it was a speech that he delivered, and we should be very clear on that. But where did he break from the script to lend his own thoughts and opinions, Chris?
So unlike in the UK Parliament, where the government writes the whole thing, and it's like, my government will do X, Y and Z, the King had a bit of personal reflection at both the top and the bottom and talked about how much he loves Canada and had a little bit of Canada seeps into his heart every time he visits. And I have to say, the King, at one stage, he looked really emotional. He was kind of looking at the sky. You could see the sort of tongue going into his cheek as if he was trying to hold back his emotions. Now, we don't know why he was feeling that emotional, but I think he really does have a deep love of Canada and being there at what is a very important time and being able to make a speech, an important speech, as he did in the Senate, I think really got to him. He really did feel it.
He also mentioned a kind of gentle nod towards President Trump. He said, all Canadians can give themselves far more than any foreign power on any continent can ever take away. Quite loaded as a statement, do you think, Sarah?
Yes, except I think this was very carefully balanced and pitched in this speech. And this was a speech in which he mentioned the strength, Canada being strong and free. He talked about its national unity, its sense of pride. But there were also a couple of nods towards Donald Trump that might have appealed as well in this speech, when he was talking about border security, for example, when he was talking about military spending. So I don't think this speech will have caused major offence to Donald Trump, but it certainly will have bolstered Canada's sense of sovereignty